Hello, listeners. It's Mallory Wilsey, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on Enrollify that I know you'll love. Mastering the Next is a cutting edge podcast exploring the future of graduate, online, and non traditional education through the lens of technology and artificial intelligence. Staying competitive in the world of graduate student recruitment and enrollment means keeping up with the ever evolving tech trends in higher ed. Join Dr. Ray Lutsky, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Element 451, as he explores what's next at the dynamic intersection of student recruitment and leading edge technology. Each episode will explore future trends and the technologies shaping the academic landscape of the 21st century. Listeners will be equipped with strategies to meet the evolving needs of today's online and non traditional learners. New episodes drop every other Friday, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Mastering the Next wherever you get your podcasts.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Learning from Leaders, a special 5-part Pulse Check series on leadership and management brought to you by Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Dr. Carrie Phillips, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer at UA Little Rock. My goal is to help aspiring leaders step into their next role with confidence. So, over the next 5 weeks, you'll hear candid conversations with successful higher education leaders who share their personal journeys, lessons learned, and practical advice on a variety of topics, ranging from managing teams and overseeing budgets to setting vision and building campus collaboration. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Learning from Leaders, the higher education podcast that is focused on training the next generation. Today, we are thrilled to have Dr. Matthew Gann with us. He serves as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Marketing, Digital Strategy, and Public Relations for the Tennessee Board of Regents. He studied leadership, particularly looking at organizational intelligence, and his research centered around the perceptions of the marketing function at public four-year universities. He has a wealth of knowledge to share with us on setting vision and culture in organizations. So we are in for a real treat. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Carrie. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
You know, there is so much to unpack about this idea of strategic visioning. So I just want to start with a high level of asking you, what does that look like from your perspective, and why is it so critical for organizational success?
Yeah, I believe strategic visioning is really about defining where we want to go and how we plan to get there. And it really isn't in the day-to-day operations. And often it really is the 2 to 4 to 5 year marks that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And the strategies and the tactics might change, but that's not really strategic visioning. Strategic visioning is very aspirational, and it really defines the core values and the purpose and the objectives that guide where we want to go and the
Yeah.
decisions that we make and the actions and even culture over time. And it's definitely not a single person. It really requires a collective insights and experience of an entire organization really to be successful. So really, to answer your question from a leadership perspective, I believe a clear strategic vision guides our decisions that we make and ensures that our resources are allocated effectively.
And as you're talking about this idea that it's guiding those decisions, can you think over your career a moment that, a clear strategic vision really played a part in overcoming a challenge or maybe navigating a situation?
Absolutely. So, this scenario probably gets into the weeds a little bit, but I
Okay.
believe it's a great example of where an aspirational vision that was defined from leadership defined the work and motivated an organization to make a really structural change. And so at the time, I was working at a regional university, a couple of hours away from the state's large land grant university with a very large football team. I won't go into names or anything, but I think you could probably guess. But you'd walk around campus at this regional university and everyone was wearing gear from the other university.
Hmm.
No colors that matched the university. There was really no school spirit, no pride. And even though people were proud that they went there and they always talked about, oh, I went to went to this university, when you were there was really no school spirit. So it was a vision from leadership to create school pride and to
Yeah.
make the university the shirt they wore around campus and out and about in their daily lives and to the gym and everything else. So the school spirit, I mean, as you know, it can be a recruiting tool, it can be a fundraising tool, and it really can be a retention tool. And so that's aspirational. So from leadership, they were like, we want to create school spirit when school spirit really wasn't there. So we really got to work. And of course, it started out with something very simple, swag. But then it went
Yeah.
into student programming and it went how the president engaged with students and how our communication narratives were and so on. And so the results really started to bloom while I was at that university. But looking back and being connected with the university now, it's in full force. And the beautiful thing is that strategic vision, that aspiration to really change and develop a school spirit was present through leadership changes, both at the presidential level, but also at the CMO level. And so that's really a great sign of leadership and really strategic vision.
I love the idea that you said that, this is something that it was aspirational. It's going to take time. Strategic visioning is not a 5-minute conversation, it's this ongoing
Absolutely.
thing. And so, one of the things that I'm really curious about is we think about new leaders, aspiring leaders that may not have been exposed to this in that level of detail. What kind of
Mhm.
practical advice would you give to that leader about how to begin setting and communicating strategic vision?
That's a great question. So, for new leaders, I guess my advice would be on setting and communicating a strategic vision is probably twofold:
Okay.
clarity and engagement. First,
Ooh.
I think you need to ensure your vision is very clear and it's communicated consistently across all levels of the organization. We always talked about when I was at the university and in my current role that every person is an admissions officer, every person is a
Mhm.
marketer. So everybody on that campus should understand how their work contributes to the larger goal in that system. And secondly, the work should not be siloed. It has to involve a complete team in developing the vision.
Yeah.
It should be collaborative across different departments, different units, and include the people sometimes you wouldn't think about including. And it has to be relatable and actionable for everybody. So, from the person that manages the groundkeeping of the university or the college, all the way to the very top and working through academic programs, everything should be actionable. So, I really do believe in that, maintaining a continuous feedback loop, allowing for the vision to evolve and remain relevant.
Yeah.
And I think these steps are really crucial in rallying a team around a strategic vision.
One of the things you said is you've got to include everyone and give everybody an opportunity to be part of that conversation. I think for me, one of the things I really struggle with is how to balance that with this idea of making sure that everybody has an opportunity, but yet we also maybe don't go down a rabbit hole or a tangent that fiscally doesn't make sense, or is it
Yeah.
sustainable? How do you kind of navigate that?
It's something that I think we all struggle with that in a
Okay,
way,
that
but
makes me feel better.
um, i- it's something I really refer to as guided autonomy. You
Ooh.
have clear objectives, but teams can innovate within the kind of the parameters that leadership set. So, for example, in my organization, my department, I get a weekly report from my directors and my operation manager, and they're big picture items, the things that if asked by my leadership team, if I need to report on these things, I can give some big picture stuff. But I also meet with my entire team once a week, and I think it is just as important for junior team members to be a part of those conversations just as much as senior members. Even if they're just listening, they can see what's going on, they can see how our processes are in making those decisions. One thing I do not do one on ones except with my operations manager. And those are largely about budgets and going over schedule and everything, because I really do think it's important for the entire team to be a part of those decisions and those discussions. And so these updates and the reviews ensure that we're aligned and we adjust those as necessary, which is rare. But this approach, I do believe, it empowers innovation. It empowers those people to make decisions while ensuring we're still all moving really in the same direction. And I think celebrating those achievements that align with our vision reinforces kind of the balance between empowering people and where we have to maybe make some realignments with things. And I think doing this keeps everything on course.
I am going to take that phrase with me, guided autonomy. Like that hits at the crux of kind of that struggle that I think I and probably other leaders face as well. And one of the other things that I'm curious your thoughts on, as a new leader, trust and how to build that is going to be key to your success in terms of building culture, setting vision. How do you build trust with your teams and how do you talk about that with them?
So I think building trust really in the context of setting vision and culture really revolves around transparency, being honest. It revolves around consistency and frequency. And most importantly, I really do believe authenticity. And so growing up, I hated hearing because I said so as a reason to do something. Because if somebody said because I said so, whether it be my parents or a teacher or something, I most likely just did the absolute opposite. I hated that. And I hate it to this day. And so I try not to do that. So I think sharing the why behind decisions and being open about the challenges that you're facing and showing your own vulnerability as a leader are all critical. I think it builds up leadership qualities in your team by doing that. And it also shows others in the organization the validity of your work, especially when you're talking about marketing and public relations and communications. In higher education, as we know, validity in your work matters. And that's how you get more funding, you get more staffing, and so on. So I do believe there can be a disconnect between individual efforts and desired outcomes. And so, from my perspective, this is a major problem. And I know this is going to probably cause some issues with some people listening to this podcast, but I do believe the trust thing connected to this causes major problems with decentralized marketing operations. You don't have that trust and you don't have that continued validity in your work. So, I think addressing these inconsistencies with training and open dialogue, including with leadership and communicating that even failure can be okay and a learning opportunity. Again, it builds that trust. It builds that trust to say, hey, I think we should go this route, but if it fails, that's okay because we learned this and then we can shift and do that. And trust, again, is about that back and forth. And it's about the creating a culture where feedback is encouraged and acted upon. And I do believe it fosters a deep sense of trust and investment in a shared vision organization wide when you are vulnerable as a leader.
Well, I think being vulnerable as a leader is important, but I also think you just hit on something else. And you hit on the word culture. And I think culture is something that really, we talk a lot about it, but I don't know that we always talk about how you achieve it and how you do it well. And I'm
Yes.
curious from your perspective, how are you creating that culture and how has that changed how you think about culture over your tenure as a leader?
I guess my approach to cultivating a positive environment, a positive culture really has evolved from being the young 24-year-old at a university, freshly moving from a very different company in healthcare to higher education, where things moved a little bit slow,
Yeah.
is to be probably more listening led about ensuring that there are channels for feedback, there are feedback loops, and that people know they're being heard, quite frankly. I believe it goes back to what we just talked about empowering people by
Mhm.
involving them in decision making. That creates a culture of engagement, a culture of ownership. And in the end, that when people own something, it creates a culture of positivity. And I think this evolution in my approach has been shaped significantly by my experiences and the lessons along the way that maybe I need to take a step back. I need to listen a little bit more. And maybe at that point, I can come forward with fresh ideas and new ideas and they be heard a little bit more.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times bestselling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
So listening is definitely something I'm hearing as a practical tip for folks trying to really try to build or enhance culture. What are some of the things that people can do that have that immediate impact? If you are trying to have some quick wins, you've got a team that maybe there hasn't been the greatest culture, the greatest dynamic, and so you've got some work you've got to do to get everybody aligned and engaged. What are some quick wins and some quick pieces that you can do to help start moving the needle and showing that you're, as a leader, there to do this the right way?
So, some practical tips in culture and initiating maybe even a culture change, I think, could be that you need to step into the room and understand that you have to be flexible, adaptable, and productive all at the same time. And
Mm.
so I think this means cultivating an environment where that shared vision is encouraged and practiced. People can see it. And I think it requires us as leaders to engage in more genuine dialogue with our teams,
Yeah.
encouraging that open communication and maybe moving beyond the hierarchy that we have in management. And a lot of that is in higher education, and it goes back to having people in the room and all team meetings and everything. So really, I think we have to start by leading by example for junior team members,
Yeah.
demonstrating really the values that we want to instill as leaders. And I think I mentioned this earlier. It includes committing to continuous learning, showing that
Yeah.
vulnerability in our own knowledge gaps, and saying it's okay to actually tell somebody, I don't know that, and I'll figure that out, or I'll find that out, or we can study that together. And I think being open to new ideas and approaches. And I think that really sets a tone for building a culture of kind of growth and innovation in a team.
Yeah, I've had that same conversation with somebody about, when I'm asking you for something, I'm okay if you don't know the answer. And that's an
hmm
okay conversation. And I think that's scary for people for some reason.
hmm I don't know is valid, and it's very valid. If we knew everything, what a boring life that would be. What a
Yeah,
boring life.
agreed. So, as we talk about culture change, and I want to give you a little bit of a story from my experience because I think it frames this really well. So, as we're talking about communication, communication is such a critical part when you're trying to shift culture, you're trying to set vision that you're communicating. So, I remember several years ago, I was at an institution and we were having a, senior kind of retreat day. And I'd put my phone on silent, was engaged in the moment, and I looked back and I had 15 missed phone calls from my office. So something is going on. They're terrified. I think the world is ending. And it turns out that someone had come into the office with a tape measure and was measuring an unused office space. And because there was some culture work and some culture shift happening, by the time I returned those phone calls, our entire office was, we were all being kicked out. Like, it had just escalated to this thing that it turned out it was just a professor that was needing a space that was accessible to meet with a student who had some special accommodations. And so, like, I had to get on the phone, make the phone calls, figure this out. But the rumor mill just went rampant on this because people didn't know what to expect, so they automatically kind of assumed the worst. And but it stayed with me in this idea of, how do we communicate when we're thinking about culture? What does that communication need to look like? What's that cadence, so that people feel comfortable in kind of that messy middle?
We have to be comfortable in the messy middle because that's as public relations people specifically, there's the three kind of areas: marketing, public relations, communications. The public relations piece is a messy middle. It's going to have to be that way. But again, I think approaching things from the idea of, again, it goes back to being transparent, but understanding where you are in an organization and understanding the culture, that if you have built a culture around honesty and this transparency, most likely if somebody comes in with a tape measure, the person would say, "Hey, how can I help you?" versus jumping to the, "Oh my gosh, everything's about to change. Oh my gosh, I'm afraid of change. I can't do this." So again, it goes back to when you begin this culture of including people in these conversations, even when maybe it is about changing your organizational chart, maybe it is about maybe shifting some people around. If you include those people in those conversations, saying, think, "Hey, we have this area over here. It needs a little bit more concentration. So I'm going to have to maybe split a position. The director of creative services no longer does social media advertising or something." I don't know. To have those conversations, people just don't jump to the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen.
I definitely experienced the worst that day, but I do think you're right. I think it really became a galvanizing kind of teaching moment of how do we open those doors for conversation. So I'm
Mhm.
curious for you, what is a lesson that you've learned from really helping set culture change and helping lead culture change that would benefit new leaders if they're facing that?
I think understanding systems thinking, just generally. And I think you probably studied this in your doctoral program as well. I studied it. I studied it in my master's program extensively. But I think reading Peter Singe's The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization, and people that are listening to this won't see this, but I keep it on my desk. Carrie can see this. Systems thinking really allows us to grasp that organizations are composed of so many interrelated parts. Initiating culture change means recognizing that interconnectedness of what we do matters to other people. And it's the interconnectedness of those actions and the policies and how they influence organizational behavior and attitudes in general. So, here is where you can identify leverage points. When you understand that connected points, and subtle changes can really lead to significant shifts in culture, it can improve processes, etc. So really understanding a systems approach of how an organization operates is really vital to creating culture and also living through cultural shifts, because they will happen.
It's one of those things, it's not a what, but it's a win in terms of when you're going to be faced with those culture moments. So, in our final question today, I want to talk about sustainability. One of the things you can do a lot of work as a leader, but how do you put mechanisms or systems or processes in place throughout this change so that your vision, the culture, all of those things have longevity? How do you sustain it?
This is hard for me because when I want something, I want it, right? But I found that be patient, but persistent. Um, Change really it requires consistent effort and a focus on achieving the small wins that really build momentum and demonstrate progress. It goes back into that systems approach of where the nuances are, where you can find small changes that can actually grow. But I feel staying committed to the vision, even when progress is slow and you're not seeing big wins, is still crucial for realizing long-term change. So I wrote a paper in my doctoral program about my personal philosophy for facilitating change. And it really was entitled Consistency Infrequently. So there are often challenges and inconsistent directions sometimes. Sometimes, as you know, of CMOs, we get pulled in so many directions. We're told this is the most critical thing at 8 a.m. and by 11, it's completely in the opposite direction and we're having to focus elsewhere. So inconsistent directions and even a fear of failure when trying to learn new things or trying something. It's the worst thing ever as a CMO to present to leadership a campaign that really did terrible. But and when, because it will happen, as you know, something just didn't go as planned. But I think that as again, a learning moment, a teaching moment for myself, is we learned this doesn't work and this isn't what people are looking for, and we can shift and it goes into something else. So I do think that's a positive. But going back to Sin, she said that structures influence behaviors. And I really do believe that's true in culture as well. If you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep seeing the same results, even if you try different people. This, a position as a CMO, you're like, well, this marketing director isn't doing exactly what I want them to do. The successes aren't there. We've got to replace it. But then you start doing the same thing. Your leadership is the same. You're asking for the same things. You're giving the same direction. You're going to see the same results. So don't be afraid to try something new. And if it fails, like a marketing campaign, learn from it and move on.
Such great advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we close out this episode, I really hope that our listeners are able to, think about the challenges, but also the opportunity in setting vision and culture. And thank you so much to Dr. Matthew Gann for his insight and ideas on how we can lead in really meaningful ways. And so as we continue this conversation, hope that you will keep learning and leading. Thanks so much for joining us.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Pathify. Gone are the days of clunky interfaces, disjointed systems, and massive, unhelpful link farms. Centralize all your systems with Pathify so that students see the information that matters to them in a digital experience that actually makes sense. From prospective students through alumni, it's about time the student experience started looking and acting like a consumer app from this century. Visit pathify.com for more. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.